Welcome to another episode in the Mass General Brigham Center of Excellence for Psychosocial and Systemic Research series on success factors and challenges for peer specialists in large healthcare systems, our heart-to-heart conversations about peer support. I'm Christina Lamkin, a peer consultant at the Center of Excellence. Our panelists today are Valeria Chambers, founder and lead facilitator at Black Voices Pathways for Recovery. She's peer lead and training coordinator at the CHA Community Behavioral Health Centers, and she's a research consultant here at the COE. Matt Cianci is director of rehabilitation and recovery at the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health Southeast Area and area human rights coordinator. Miranda McLaughlin is a postdoc clinical and research psychology fellow, also at the Mass General Brigham COE. Sally Rogers is a senior research scientist, Boston University Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation. We're here to discuss how to evaluate peer support services and how you might introduce qualitative measures. We plan to present this video to a learning collaborative of mental health agency and CBHC employees as the basis for sharing your experience and spurring ideas. In the listening groups that RCOE convened in 2024, peer participants indicated that peer specialists find conventional measures to be incomplete. Today, our guests will share their opinions on valuable qualitative measures and what they might add. Sally, you've had many years measuring peer support. How is it typically measured at BU, and have your methods evolved over time?
Yes, well, thank you for inviting me to talk about this topic. As you know, the center has a longstanding interest in peer support, and we've conducted many peer support studies over the years. I wouldn't say there's one typical way of measuring peer support, but there are lots of considerations that I'll try to mention. We've looked at, for example, the effect of peer supporters delivering new services. We've looked at the stigma that they might experience on the job, their job satisfaction, how they can help in vocational contexts. And I'd say if I were designing a study to look at the effect of peer support, I'd first want to consider whether I have open-ended global questions that I want to answer or to have the peer supporter answer in their own voice of their own experiences and their feelings. If I want to try to quantify the results of having peer support delivered to a group of people or to me, I'd want to be looking more at a quantitative type of study. Qualitative studies ask open-ended questions, often through interviews, and we hear the voice of the person coming through. In quantitative studies, we look for surveys and measures of different kinds that allow us to quantify or put numbers to those kinds of outcomes that we might be looking for. More recently, we've embarked on first mixed methods where we involve both quantitative and qualitative approaches to get the richest picture of peer support services, and also a lot of participatory methods so that we ask peer supporters, what kinds of measures do you think we should be looking at in this context? I'd also want to consider, what is the peer supporter doing in this role, in this place where I want to do an evaluation? What are their tasks? What do they think the effects are that they're having? And then I'd want to look for a way of measuring whatever it is that they think they're affecting or changing in the people that they serve. As an example, we did a community participation study where we had peer supporters delivering a community participation service, a new service. And of course, what our outcome there was community engagement and community activities. So we had to tailor our measure to get at that outcome. In another study, we were looking at vocational peer support and whether peer supporters can increase individuals' engagement in the world of work and maybe even find employment. And of course, there the outcomes had to be tailored to that particular setting and what we were trying to take a look at. So it does involve looking at what the peer supporter is doing and the kind of outcome we think they're going to have. And of course, I would say that for all the studies we do, participatory methods are really important, where we involve peer supporters in trying to design the best study possible and to look at the best measures possible. So thank you very much.
Sure. Miranda, how's the work of peer support typically measured in your experience, or what parameters might you add?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me as well. And first, I want to co-sign a lot of what Sally has already said. I think that co-collaboration and ensuring that you're working with the program and the peer support specialists to really determine what they're specifically targeting with their peer services is crucial. And Sally already said it better, so I won't go in too much to that. But I think in addition, just to expand and a little bit of what she was saying about also making sure we're measuring and putting in measures for the peer specialists themselves. So not only the outcomes of their services, but also what barriers, structural or otherwise, that are preventing them from providing the care that they would like to provide. Having worked at other sites in other states, I've had peer support specialists talk about how difficult hours, financial strain, their own experiences of discrimination or minimal opportunities for career growth have kind of limited their ability to do the type of work that they want to be doing. And you'd hate to get to the end of the study and not find the answers you're looking for and haven't measured or considered potential barriers that might have gotten in the way. Um, I also think for all research, it's really important to consider marginalized groups that may interact with your questions and how best to ensure their voices are heard. Of course, on a basic level, this is asking individuals about how cultural identities are integrated into their peer services, if there were barriers in receiving services. Those are always important first questions. But also the way we collect data can also be a barrier. So semi-structured interviews really allow for a huge wealth of qualitative data, but they also require this pretty large cognitive load that can be pretty time consuming for the responder and for the analyzer. You can also do open-ended questions on untimed surveys, but they also require a lot of cognitive effort. And so I think when you're looking for a diversity of responses, this is where I co-sign again the mixed methods approach, where you have some quantitative rating scales and some qualitative. So that way an individual could rate how they're feeling in one domain. And then if they are able to elaborate further at the time, willing, have the resources, then that's great. This really ensures more voices are heard throughout the data collection process. And when it comes to online surveys, it's also really important to consider additional barriers, whether disability, lack of familiarity with technology, or difficulties with sustained attention. So we can minimize these issues up front by ensuring our content's very concise with big lettering, that open-ended responses allow speech to text, that all images have a description. In some cases, it can be good ahead of time to consider whether some clients might want support while taking the questionnaire, but perhaps by someone unrelated to their services. So those are just some things to consider, but I definitely co-sign on the co-collaboration piece to all of that. So thank you.
Sure, sure. So many confounding factors that you might not think of, both for the peer, for the other peer, for the relationship. So Matt, what do you think is important to measure about peer support?
Yeah, thank you very much, Christina. I appreciate being here. So when I think about measuring peer support, um, I think it's important to step back from traditional frameworks of mental health, um, and really build the whole process of evaluation around the experiences of those who are receiving the benefit of the service of peer support, and really centering the process around their voices. So I from my own experience, I think about how has peer support helped me? What is the impact that it has had in my life? And I would have originally sort of described my own wellness or my struggles with mental health using language that my psychiatrist used to define sort of what I was struggling with, right? Using disease-based language, medicalized language, but it was peer support, a peer supporter who introduced me to the idea that that is really only one way to look at what you're struggling with. It's a construct, and it's a rather limiting and problematic construct. But that wellness really in a peer support relationship is completely self-defined, right? It's really not about sort of what's wrong with you. It's about how do you define what you're struggling with? And that really was an incredibly empowering sort of idea that really transformed my own conceptions of my wellness, what I struggle with, what's sort of at the core of me as a person, outside of, a medicalized framework. And so, thinking about that and thinking about my experiences of how it impacted me, the only conclusion I could come to in terms of, how to do a qualitative analysis is be willing to sort of just reframe any kind of linear thinking about progress or wellness and let the people who are receiving the benefit or intended to receive the benefit of peer support define for us what the impact is, what the value is, right? Help shouldn't be defined by those providing it. It should be defined by those receiving it and its effectiveness. So whatever process, you use to try to evaluate, it really has to be built around those voices of the people who are receiving the benefit. It's really there. It's intended to help them. And so they are the best ones to really define for us what is impactful about it. How is it different? It can be difficult to aggregate, but it's so important. It's worth getting right, and that's really what's at the core of the value of peer support and understanding any impact it has or its effectiveness.
Hmm. Have to be careful about what we measure and make it person-centered. So many different areas mentioned here. I hope this spurs discussion. Now, Valeria, you're a researcher at the Cambridge Health Alliance. What measures do you use, and what might you add for a more complete picture? Or why are qualitative measures appropriate or important?
Thanks so much, Christina. Yeah, I love this conversation. I think it's so important to have folks come together to really piece carefully together the elements that create peer support. And one thing that I really like about qualitative measures is that it gives you a full picture, a more full picture of the people behind the um, the numbers or the statistics. So if we have like a building that's being built, maybe the quantitative is the structure and the foundation, and it's so important. But then when you bring in, the furniture and the knickknacks and the beautiful carpets and paintings, it really makes a home and you get a true sense of what this place is. And that's kind of how I think about researching peer support. Um, at CHA, I use a lot of qualitative methods, such as interviewing, case studies, giving people time to reflect on what's important to them and how they express it whether it be in a focus group or community advisory board, to get their perspective and find ways to encourage them to speak their truth and to speak to what they find helpful or what needs they can identify. I think it's very tricky, as people have said. For a long time, peer support was not being measured because they said it's impossible to quantify, and every peer supporter is different, and so it's going to look different every time. And so, are we comparing apples to oranges? But we've come a long ways, and I love that research is really progressing, and peer support is now an evidence-based practice, which is wonderful. I'll tell you about one study that I participated in where Cambridge Health Alliance and the Transformation Center came together. And academic community partnerships are really powerful, where researchers work in the service of community members that are gathered to work on a problem. And it was very interesting to see our process as we did this. At first, when we went to CHA to meet the researchers and we were in this big table, around this table, it felt very foreign. People were kind of shy. We felt like, these researchers with, alphabet soups after their names, there was an imbalance of power, and people did not feel comfortable yet to really express their experiences. And so, fortunately, we had John Delman working with us, who is a person with lived experience as well as a senior researcher. And he was able to come up with a plan so that we began to co-teach, co-learning. So the researchers would present, and then the peer specialists would present. And it was a way to balance out the power and then go back to community members and get their take and see what they had to bring to the table. So it was something that I thought was really wonderful in utilizing the strengths of each group. Again and again, community members say that they are interested in research. They want to participate, but they're not interested in these kind of one and done. They really want to get to know the research community and have a relationship. They want to hear the results. They want to see what it's doing for their community. So I think there's so much opportunity there.
A lot of ways to try to introduce humanity into this area. Just a few things we just heard about include the legitimacy improving of the peer movement, people's own goals, their language and culture, worldview, a lot of confounding factors that you have to look out for, uh, blending quantitative and qualitative methods using scales and verbal responses, involving both peers, watching out for the barriers that limit the effectiveness of the serving peer, and the fact that there are many, many axes and aspects to this concept. I hope our viewers have fun discussing it all and coming up with your own ideas. And thanks so much, Sally, Valeria, Matt, and Miranda. Bye-bye.